Hey guys, today we're going to talk about making different kind of pluck sounds, especially these kind of wooden or metallic kind of sounding plucks that you can often find in tropical pop genres or in general in very mainstream pop tracks that are popular right now. This fragment that you heard is a part of our new project file, which you can check out. And yeah, let's get into the pluck making process. I'm going to show you 3 plucks, but first I just need to go into another project. The first plug that we had is made in Collision. This is pretty much the same plug that we used in the project file. Now the other 2 plugs are all made in Serum, and they use no external Ableton effects. It's just all Serum. I'm going to show you how to make all of these, and yeah, let's begin with the first one. Okay, I'm just going to copy this track over here and close this group. Now let's remove this whole instrument and put in Collision here. Collision is a physical modeling synth which uses mathematical algorithms to create sounds that sound kind of organic, but also kind of digital. And it is a great instrument to create sounds that are somewhere between recorded and synthesized. They sound really cool and original. Before we get into making the Collision pluck, you need to know that the instrument consists of this section, this excitator section, where you can choose between mallet and noise, and this is the thing that strikes a resonator, which you can select here, and yeah, you can choose marimba strings, and for this purpose we're going to use a tube and we're going to use a mallet, not the noise. So the volume of the mallet we're going to set all the way up, but the stiffness to 90%, and the stiffness does kind of change the sound. We want it pretty bright, but not too bright. And now we just want the first resonator, and you want to set it as tube, because I don't know, it just sounds very cool when you strike a tube with a mallet in the synth. An important part of the synth is the pitch envelope here, which adds this pitch kind of shift effect at the beginning. And with this pitch envelope, we're kind of shaping the transient of the synth, adding a bit of cool attack. When you have all this set up, you probably want to mess around with the decay and radius to achieve a somewhat tonal sample. And also you can mess around with the tune, because the sound is going to change according to which note you're playing. But you just need to find one note that sounds good, because we're going to resample that note and put it in a simpler. We're going to make a new MIDI clip and make a C3 note. We're going to freeze this track and we're going to flatten it. And now we have the sample. Now let's take this track once again, duplicate it, delete this instrument, and I'm going to put this sample right on this track. So here's what we have so far. First thing, I would tune this synth. So let's take a tuner, play the C3 note, and make sure we are playing a C. Alright, let's turn off the warping here. Let's play it once again. We actually need just 3 voices. We don't need more overlapping notes. We can actually throw in another pitch envelope here. Let's increase the amount, but make it way shorter. Now without it, it sounds like this. But with it, to me it sounds way sharper, and I think it's cool. Now we also need some reverb on this. Let's try this reverb. But to me it sounds a bit weird, because the transient of the synth creates these weird kind of grainy sounds on the reverb. So what I like to do is group all of this, select and Command and G. Now I like to open up the chains and use this other chain as 100% wet reverb. Let's turn off the reverb on the first one. So this would be our dry signal and this would be our wet signal. And on the wet signal, I want to skip the transient here. So I'm going to increase the attack and you'll hear how the sound changes. Now let's play it with the pluck. Compared to I think it sounds much more smooth and it's really more lush and warm. We can mess around more with the attack on the wet layer here. And we could throw in an EQ and boost some of the highs on this reverb. Now let's try to compare it with the first synth. Yeah, it's pretty similar. Now all we need to do is change the volumes of the layers, maybe less of the reverb. And it's done. Here's how you make this kind of acoustic sounding pluck. Number one. Now we're gonna go into Serum and I'm gonna show you different kinds of plucks. So the second one is gonna sound like this. And it's gonna be made with FM synthesis in Serum. So let's get into it. Let's initialize this patch and let's start making it from scratch. Now most plucks in Serum are made using subtractive synthesis, which means you're kind of using a very full wavetable or oscillator type, and you're just subtracting from that sound, shaping the sound mostly with filters to create a pluck. But now for this one, we're going to use a sine wave and we're going to shape it using FM synthesis, which in short is just routing sine waves into sine waves to create more interesting timbres of a sound. So to begin with, let's search for basic shapes and a very simple sine wave. And let's do the same thing on the second oscillator. Let's tune this oscillator 2 octaves higher. And on the first oscillator, I want to choose FM from B because we're going to be modulating this oscillator with this oscillator. So we're routing this oscillator into here. And let's set it to 3%, just like this. Now make sure to turn down the level all the way on the B oscillator because we don't want to hear it at all. And let's listen to it. Now this oscillator barely affects the sound, but we're going to do something cool in a second. So let's take the second envelope and map it to this very knob. As for the settings, we're going to use 0 attack, 0 sustain as well, but we're going to shape the sound with the decay. Now, if you modulate the FM knob like this, it's probably going to produce some distortions, some weird noises, because that's just the way it works in Serum. But if you set the decay very short, you can create actually a nice wooden kind of sound, thanks to the noise that Serum produces here. So here's what it would sound like if we set a longer decay, which is terrible. Now let's go down to a very low value, like 12 milliseconds. Let's actually change the amount of this one. Let's set it to 81%. You can hear that we've added some nice attack here, but it's still a very static sine wave. There's not much going on. So to change that, we're going to use the amp envelope, which is the first envelope in Serum, with 0 sustain, actually minus infinite sustain, but all the way down. And the decay we're going to use at somewhere around 570 milliseconds. It's fine. The release is important too, because if you stop playing a note before it reaches this dot here, it's gonna be cut off, and with the release we can kind of prevent that. So we can set it to like 170 or so. Yeah, it's fine. Now to add some more cool attack, we're going to use the noise oscillator here. And let's change it to organics and AC hum 2. And let's take the third envelope and map it to the level here. Now attack and sustain all the way down, and we're just going to shape it with the decay, which is going to be very short. Let's turn down the decay on this one to 4 milliseconds, very, very short. It's barely going to be audible now. Now we can turn down the volume of the first oscillator to emphasize the noise a bit. Okay, this is fine, but this is very, very quiet. We can turn up the master all the way now. And that's actually all for the oscillator section. We're not going to add anything more in here. We can go right into the effects section and spice this sound up. So let's begin with some EQ. Let's throw in a 4 dB boost, 4 dB at 2000, at 2K, and with a pretty low Q, just like this. Just to boost some of the high end. We can throw in a compressor just to even out the volumes a bit when we're playing multiple notes, just to make sure we're always staying at the same volume. And also we're going to boost the gain here with the compressor because the sound is very quiet still. So let's go to minus 50 dB here. We have a very quiet sound. Okay, we can see that the compressor is working here. Let's set a pretty moderate ratio, like 2:1. And a pretty fast attack and a bit longer release. Now with the attack you can really shape the transient of the sound. Longer attack is gonna let through more of the transient. A shorter attack will tame it a bit quicker. Make sure to find the sweet spot with the attack. Then we're gonna boost the gain a little bit. Yeah, let's boost it 16 dB. Now this sounds very snappy, but we're gonna reduce that a bit with a filter that we're gonna apply now. And the filter is gonna be a comp filter. This one, comps. Comp filtering is something that occurs when you are recording stuff with multiple microphones. It's kind of an artifact, but you can use this to make something sound more acoustic, to kind of simulate the recorded effect. Let's play with the cutoff here, and I'm gonna show you what it sounds like. I'm gonna probably set it around 3K. Now before. Yeah, after the comp filter, I think it sounds way more organic. I really like this filter. Let's leave it here and also add a reverb. This is an option. We can choose the plate reverb to kind of extend the harmonics of the sound and add a bit of space to it. Size 22%, moderate size. We don't need any pre-delay. Just need to cut a bit of the lows here and throw in a bit of the mix. Let's set it at somewhere around 16% because I think more isn't needed. Yeah, this is all for this sound. Now let's compare it to the sound we were going for. This is pretty similar. And yeah, this is another way in which you can create an acoustic sounding pluck, this time all in Serum. I'm going to show you the third technique. And the third technique is going to use additive synthesis. So let's initialize this patch, and I'm going to show you how to make this sound. By the way, this is what we're going for. So for this synth, we're going to use additive synthesis, which is essentially building sounds from sine waves, adding harmonics to a sound just through sine waves. And we're going to create actually a custom wavetable here, and then we're going to use just a tad of filtering, so subtractive synthesis, and a tad of effects. So we're going to go straight into the wavetable editor here by clicking this pencil here. And this is where we're going to work. This is the table edit view. Now here's where you can add multiple sine waves. This is just the fundamental, and you can throw in a few more to create harmonics. And you can see how the sound changes here. Now I created this sound by throwing in some marimba samples into dropping them onto the oscillator and analyzing their harmonics. Now what I found is that a marimba often uses these harmonics. The first one, just a tad of the second one, the third one, the fourth one, then 10 and 17. And if you mess around with these, you can create interesting timbres of a sound. Just make sure that the sound has these metallic kind of harmonics. But now we want to shape the sound a tad more, and we don't want all the harmonics on all the time. So we're gonna throw in another, create another frame here, and let's delete all of these. It's just gonna be a sine wave. Now let's go to morph and spectral, and that's gonna morph between our two wavetables here. So when we go back here and tweak the wavetable position, you can see that our sound changes from a very harmonic rich sound to a simple sine wave. Okay, so now we're gonna modulate the wavetable position with an LFO. And to do this, let's set it to envelope, because we want to use it as an envelope. Turn off the BPM, set the rate to around 3.4 hertz. Now set up the curve like this and map it to here. So it should sound like this. Now obviously we want to shape the amp envelope here. Let's set the decay to around 750 milliseconds, so relatively short, and turn down the sustain. Now let's add a click. Let's use the second envelope, make it very short and map it to the coarse pitch to create a very short click. So we're going to use a very short decay, somewhere around 3.6 milliseconds, and take the sustain all the way down. And let's map it to the coarse pitch here. And let's click Option and Shift and click here to set it to unipolar instead of bipolar. It should sound like this now. Let's bypass it. It creates a very nice click. I like it. Now I kind of want to shape the high end with a low pass filter here. So let's set it to low 12, just the first default filter, and use the third envelope to move it. So let's map the third envelope here, also unipolar. Set it to 18%, so just a tad. Let's set it to 1200, and with the settings, let's go down with the sustain and the decay to 317 milliseconds. It's going to be pretty short. And before, now we have way more control over the harmonics. That's all for the oscillator section. Now let's go into the effects and spice up the sound. We're going to use an EQ, and we're going to high pass the sound at around 178 hertz, getting rid of the sub frequencies. I'm going to set the Q to 44% so it doesn't have this little bell resonance over here. 44. Now we're going to also add a shelf. We're going to boost it by 7 dB at 850 hertz, just to add a bit of a tilt in the EQ. Yeah, let's turn down the Q all the way. And with this shelf, we are tilting the sound so the highs are more present and the lows are less present. Let's listen to it now. We really want to focus on the highs here, so I think it works well. Let's throw in a comps filter, but for this one, we're going to do something cool. Let's set it to 6400 hertz. Now it should sound like this. So it adds a lot of that acoustic kind of effect. Now I noticed that when you increase the resonance here, the sound gets very interesting and bright and metallic. We can turn down the master because the sound is very loud now. But let's use actually a lot of the resonance, 98%. I kind of like this effect. And we're gonna throw in even some drive. Very subtle. We're gonna do a trick with the pan knob, because I noticed that when you move it, it creates this interesting effects. You're gonna hear it, especially if you're on headphones. So I'm gonna use LFO2 to tweak the pan in time and to create some of these interesting effects. It almost sounds as if there's kind of water in the background of the sound. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I like the background effect of this. Let's set it to envelope, turn up the BPM, set the rate to 3.3 Hertz, then map it just to the pan. Yeah, I think it's cool. Now that's almost all for the sound. We're just gonna use a splash of reverb at the end. Let's use the plate reverb, 27% size, so not too much. 0 pre-delay, no low cut, but we're gonna cut the highs just a bit. And let's set the damp to 23%, somewhere around this. And yeah, width all the way up, because I want the sound to be wide. And let's turn down the mix to 23%, somewhere here. Yeah, should sound good. Let's compare it to the sound we are going for. So there's one more thing that you can do to make it more interesting. You can use more unison voices here. So for that sound I used 3, and now it sounds like this. If you want your sound to be wide in the mix, you can use the detune. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.